Yeah,
It appears we have a state treasurer who's not a fan.
correct.
And I looked at some stuff on his blog, and I really couldn't tell whether he was making good points or just blowing smoke. One of the things that gives me pause is in everything he wrote, the Bank of North Dakota wasn't mentioned even once. So can you give us any insight as to what his problem is and how big a stumbling block that is?
He's stupid.
I think his primary argument at one point was that it's unconstitutional. So,
We can change that.
yeah, we can change that. Constitutional amendments, good or bad, seem to fly every election anymore. You know, I mean, we just passed another bad one, I think, this last session that I actually voted against off the House floor, which was to put the excessive rainy day fund money and good times into mandate that it goes into the rainy day fund. Excess revenues collected on a good year. To me, that's a way of putting revenue out of reach of the legislature, and it ratchets down what is available for the budget. And there's better uses for that money. In fact, if we could have steered that towards capitalization for the bank, I mean, we could have leveraged that money up to 10 times, you know, using that fractional reserve policy. Another one of his points is that the state treasurer invests the money at the most efficiently of any of the 50 states right now. And that may or may not be true. I don't have a way of evaluating that. But I know that the interest that we earned off of our state money, off of those investments in 2010 was $4 million, which is, I mean, compared to what we could do with our state tax dollars and leveraging it back into our economy, $4 million really is budget dust when considering the opportunity costs of that money. In a previous year, I think it was 2008 though, it did return about $160 million in interest income off of the invested money. So that's what we're sacrificing, is the earned interest that we would be making off that money had we been investing it instead. I would contend that that's more than made up for in new revenue by leveraging that money back into our economies and creating jobs, building infrastructure, doing all those things that we really, as a state, are not good at quantifying those benefits, right? So when we say, do a fiscal note, for instance, are you familiar with what a fiscal note is? Fiscal note is a piece of paper that the Office of Programmers, or Office of Financial Management puts together on every bill that may have fiscal impact. And it tells you exactly what that fiscal impact will be. Well, right now, the only thing they consider is direct costs. So, say you've got a tutoring or a mentoring bill that may cost $4 million, okay? They'll say, okay, you gotta deduct $4 million, but wait a second, what if that keeps somebody in school to graduate so that they're becoming a productive member of society? There's no way to really quantify the benefit of that as an investment, as opposed to direct costs. So those are problems of analyzing the benefit of money being invested as a treasurer would have in the market versus invested in us, the people. You can't quantify that investment in us as a people and building society. You can, I guess, maybe that's rocket science. Anyway, I diverge because what I was really talking about was when I went back to North Dakota, which is the capital, Bismarck is the capital, they also have an archive. So the history of how the Bank of North Dakota came about was that back in 1990, that era, people hated Democrats, but they also hated Republicans. So they elected this third party called the Nonpartisan League, NPL. And the NPL, when they came into power, they had a program to liberate farmers from the strings of Minneapolis and Wall Street, because their farmers felt like they had lost control of their own lives. Their circumstances were entirely dictated by people from the East who could care less about them. So they ran a campaign, number one, to create a bank, to create their own granary, and the third bill that they passed was to sell bonds to capitalize those projects. So when they were trying to run that campaign, they were actually using Seattle as a model of public ownership. So we had a similar problem going on here in the Seattle area. Farmers in the Puget Sound region couldn't get their produce off the docks because the prices were controlled by the shippers who were just ripping everybody off. So they got so angry, and that's when we formed the Public Port of Seattle, Public Port Association, Port of Seattle. So, see, Port of Seattle Public Elevator. The caption down there says, probably the only publicly owned and operated grain elevator in the United States back in 1919. So they were using Seattle as the model of public ownership. So it's interesting now that here almost a century later it's come back and they're teaching us how to build publicly owned banks. So that's it, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if I went over time or what. I still have my 3-minute ditty that I claim time to do, so I'll answer a couple of questions here first.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes easily, so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure, my pleasure, thank you. Yes.
Well, I think I understood. You to say that the state treasurer thinks he's such a good investor that he can do better than SPAC. Well, why wouldn't he just go to work for the bank and then really do well?
He says he has a conflict of interest in managing the state's funds and managing the bank at the same time. So organizationally, I had wanted him to be on the top governing board, but he says he has a conflict of interest in doing that.
Well, that's what I was sort of worried. Is he fighting the bank's wars for that? I mean, does he have some sort of...
I'm not going to assign motives to his intent. Yeah. It is what it is.
We're a little suspect of things like that in this group.
Being good old lefties like
Well, I guess my question is that you see we have a lot of activists here, and what can we do to...
Okay, the ask, the infamous ask at the end. Well, actually, I've had so many people who have just really so graciously been wanting to get involved, and I'm just me. I'm having a hard enough time trying to get the bill on track. What we really need is political support in the Senate, I believe, because I think that in the House we have the support to move it. My fear is that it will die in the Senate. So if you know of senators personally, or you know other people, it never hurts to talk to your representatives as well. But I think most of the Democratic representatives, at least out of this area, actually have probably signed on to the bill.
Yeah.
Getting Republicans, possibly, I've really tried hard to keep this a nonpartisan issue. And I keep throwing the North Dakota model out there as much as possible and say, this is just good business sense for the people of the state. And privately, several of them have come back to me and said, yeah, we agree. We think it's a great idea for the state, but we're never going to go against our leadership. So the leadership, if you could move the leadership to saying, this is in the best interest of the people of the state.
Where does our Senator Hargrove stand on this issue? Do you know?
I actually haven't talked to him. No, there's this protocol thing about actually going across. It's best to have a senator talk to other senators rather than representatives trying to lobby everybody over. They get a little twitchy about that.
But we as the public can contact Senator.
Oh,
Hargrove.
absolutely.
We
That's the primary ask. Yeah. So if I can get on to my other thing for just a second. I have graphs and charts and all this, but I won't even get into that because it's much quicker if I just talk about it real quickly. Well, we have a fundamental revenue problem, both in how revenue is collected, but how much is collected, but in the way it's collected. We have the most regressive tax structure in the country. We're number 50 out of all 50 states as far as on a regressivity scale because we're so focused on sales tax, which takes so much money out of those who could least afford to pay it. And those who could best afford to pay it, pay a minimal amount. So my goal, that legislative goal, has been progressive tax reform ever since I entered into the legislature. But as you can see, we keep passing, the public keeps voting down things. Whenever an income tax is thrown out there, it gets voted down. People are not necessarily voting in their own best interest. So what I've asked people to do is two things: to go back to your communities, to start talking about tax fairness and frame it in this way. Our grandparents, my parents and grandparents, grew up in an America where they had that American dream. There was equity of access for opportunity for all. And how do you do that? How do you build that infrastructure to provide that equity of access for everybody? They had an economic principle where those who got the most out of the system were morally obligated to put the most back into the system, and we build the system for everybody. That's equity, right? Providing an opportunity for everybody. Well, when Reagan came in, he flipped that. Those who get the most out of the system should keep it all because they will ostensibly create jobs. It'll trickle down in the form of jobs, right, to the rest of us. And we know how well that's worked, right? We see the disparity between the top 1% and the 99% greater than it ever has been since 1929. We've seen corporate tax rates not even zero, but actually we're paying them. You know, companies like Exxon, Boeing, GE, it's unconscionable. So there's been this huge transfer of revenue obligation from corporations and wealthy onto working people and working poor, or fixed income people. So the real answer is not what the Tea Party solution is, which is we're feeling overtaxed, let's just cut everybody's taxes. That doesn't work. It leaves a scorched earth behind us and nothing left for our children. What we need to do is transfer the tax burden back onto the wealthy and the corporations who originally transferred it onto us. Now, I could support all this with graphs and charts, and I won't bother with that. You probably all know that.
I'd like to just mention two things. One, on that last subject, not only is putting the money back into the people the right thing to do, it's also the logical thing to do for the wealthy, because in the long run, those people will have more money, they'll spend more money, and they'll make more profits. And the other thing on the people always voting down these tax increases, if you would just pass a bill that would require truth in advertising when it comes to politics, you wouldn't have any problems anymore.
Yeah, that kind of steps on the First Amendment, though.
Well, lying to the people is not freedom of speech. Lying to the people, you can't lie to them about your products. You can't lie to them about your drugs. Why can you lie to them about your politics?
Supreme Court said they could. That's fine.
So, at any rate, that's my little shtick, that I want you to take that message back and try and, you know, get people more aware of what I'm going to try and do in this legislative session to start this educational campaign is to pass a couple of bills. Number one is to have the Department of Revenue collect official data on revenue, what would you call it, distribution, who's paying what, and do that on a longitudinal study over time to see where the shifts have been. And then number two, I want to use the voters pamphlet to put this nonpartisan data in the public domain. Once the data is out there, it's just raw data in the public domain, then community-based organizations can interpret that data and build campaigns around it because it's from a legitimate source, the Department of Revenue or an Office of So that's the long-term goal towards progressive tax reform. Maybe we can start getting people to vote in their own interests if they start understanding where their interests really are. So thanks for giving me that 3 minutes on that piece. And I'll hang around